name is Biricha from Biricha Digital, and in this short video we are going to talk about conducted emissions test as required by the European Union's EMC directive. We are in the pre-compliance test chamber of Omicron in Austria, and we have got a test set up here which I'm going to talk to you a little bit later. But first, what do we mean by conducted emissions? Well, effectively what the standards require us is to make sure that the amount of RF energy that is on the cables of any device that you're trying to sell in the European Union is not above a certain limit that is going to cause disturbance with other devices. Effectively, all of the ports, any cable that comes out of your device needs to be tested. Very much like the radiated emissions, whereby you did not want your device under test to emit radio frequency emissions in the air. We are now this time just looking at the cables and making sure that we don't have any disturbance on the cables that can cause problems. So this is a typical test setup for conducted emissions. Here is our Body 100, which is again our device under test, and what we are trying to measure is the conducted emissions of the cables. In this particular case we are measuring the power port. The power cable and the power supply gets connected to this test device called a LISN. This is a V-network LISN from Rohde & Schwarz, and the job of this unit is to make sure that the power port you're trying to measure, this port you're trying to measure, sees a stable impedance. Otherwise your measurement will not be repeatable. Effectively, very much like an anechoic chamber, when we are trying to stop other emissions corrupting your measurement, this unit is trying to stop emissions on the power lines that is powering the whole test instrument from corrupting the measurement. So the measurement that you make is actually just the emissions from this device and not everything else that is connected to the network. On this LISN there is a port which is again defined in the standard, and the output of this is the RF noise that we're going to measure, and we connect that to a test receiver, and the receiver will measure the emissions on the frequency band of interest, and again it gives you a limit line, and if you're above the limit line then you have failed the test, and typically in a case of a power supply you would look at designing perhaps a better filter. And if you're below the line, as you can see this one, and you may be able to see this, it actually passes quite beautifully anyway, which means that we're already ready for the compliance test. You need to measure both the line and the neutral, and effectively you press this button and it measures the line, and then you press the other button and it measures the neutral. So there are many other tests within the group of conducted emissions in addition to the RF conducted emission test that we just did, and that very much depends on your product and on application and on the power rating. But one that is very important and very common is of course the line current harmonic requirements of the standard, whereby we are talking about low frequency line current harmonics that your product injects onto the power line as opposed to the RF frequency range that we talked about. And of course this is the power factor correction requirements that we do. Effectively what the standard says is that the current that your product is drawing from the mains has to be as close to a sinusoid as possible. You can take very peaky current to deliver the same amount of power, but of course if the peak of the current that you're drawing is very large, that has got an impact on the cabling and the shielding and so on. So the standard prohibits you from being able to have too much line current harmonics, but that is much lower frequencies and is effectively around the multiples of the line frequency, which in Europe is 50 Hertz. So this PFC requirement, the line current harmonic requirement, and combined with the RF emissions test that we carried out earlier on, pretty much embodies the most popular of the tests that we do for conducted emissions test.